If you don't get your compliance right, you go out of business. So if it's your minimum level of requirement, you have to get it done, right? Do you need a gold star to do it? No, but you need to get it done.
I just spoke to Don Maher, the head of tax at Mohawk Industries, a US-based multinational. And we discussed, among other things, process excellence, which is one of my favorite topics. Turns out that Don is a process excellence machine. He and his team are really on top of their game. We also discussed how important tax compliance is and how you can convert tax compliance into a true value-driving activity. And then Don also, throughout the conversation, shared multiple very valuable tips and tricks about how to attract talent, but equally important also how to retain talent in your tax function. Check the full episode of this podcast to learn all about it. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Tax Leaders Unplugged. Our guest today is Don Maher, and Don is the head of tax at Mohawk Industries and is US based. And before, Don has had different in-house tax roles at very large companies like Dow Chemical and Koch Industries. And he started as a tax advisor, surprise, surprise, working at Deloitte and KPMG. And today we will be discussing the importance of process excellence while managing global tax operations at a Fortune 500 company, and obviously other interesting stuff as well. Welcome, Don.
Thanks, Stevie. I appreciate that warm welcome. Today is going to be epic. We're going to have a blast.
Great to hear. Don, I'm always very curious about my guests, what they are up for in life outside of tax. What is it that keeps you up in terms of hobbies and interests outside of tax?
From those of you who can't tell from my accent, I'm an American, so I grew up playing baseball, basketball, and American football. At this point in my life, though, it's all about hiking, biking, and a little bit of golf here and there, and spending time with my family. I just got back from wandering through Switzerland on family vacation. It was a blast, and I highly recommend wandering through Switzerland. Everybody should do it.
Oh yeah, I love it. And our previous guest was even based in Switzerland. So for me as well, it's high on the list of places to go. And then what brought you in the end in the tax world? What made you decide to go into tax?
Oh, well, for me, tax was not my first choice. I thought I was going to be the next great litigator. For those of you who are familiar with call it TV series, there's a show here in the United States called Perry Mason. It came out in the 60s. I saw myself as the next great Perry Mason. I was going to defend people and, get them off and, be very, very successful doing that. And then I went to law school and I started working for a judge, and I figured out litigation is really hard to swallow. And when I worked for a judge, I worked in a bankruptcy court. And the only thing that was fun about bankruptcy court was the bankruptcy workout, which was sort of constructive, and it was all about math, and it was helping create something for these debtors, and it also has a fair bit of tax involved in it. So when my time working for the judge ended, I went back to school. I got a master's in tax called an LLM and jumped into public accounting, and that's how it started for me.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting path, I think, that you took to get there. Thanks for sharing. So it seems that you are mostly working or have been working for very large companies. Is that something that you got attracted to naturally, or is it because why are there no SMEs or maybe fast-growing startups in there?
Yeah, for me, I've always had a keen interest in international business, which is why I chose to focus on global companies. If you think about it, a role within a global company offers opportunities for international travel, experience conducting business in diverse and multicultural backgrounds and areas, environments across the globe. And so for me, it was sort of an ideal work environment. So big global organizations is where I tend to thrive. So that's my story.
Yeah, got it, got it. With those big organizations, I can imagine that it also brings a lot of complexity when it comes to the global tax operations and managing them. And that brings me to one of my favorite topics. I think this is process excellence and the importance of having very solid processes in place when you are working in large multinationals and you need to deal with the global tax operations. Tell me a bit about your overall focus on processes in the companies where you have worked, and maybe insights, the value of having solid processes, which you can share with the audience here.
So, every company tends to be a little different because everybody looks at this stuff slightly, towards their own lens in their own way. I've had companies focus on what they call lean. I've had companies focus on Six Sigma. What tends to be the focus today is a combination of the two. Lean being focused on speed and process efficiency and eliminating waste, whereas Six Sigma focuses on the precision and reducing variation and defect. And so when you put them together, you tend to get a pretty good process. And it's that continuous process improvement that you hear about across many companies today. This combination or the integration of Lean and Six Sigma produces 5 steps. You go through and define your value. You figure out, what constitutes value from your stakeholders' perspective, and those stakeholders include the tax department. So you emphasize how you get aligned from a tax and legal perspective, for that matter, within the organization. You then sit down and map your value stream. What are all the steps in your process? You sit there and you go through a visualization exercise. You try to figure out all your inefficiencies, all your bottlenecks, what helps you eliminate waste. And then after you identify all those non-value added activities, you sit down and create a new flow. You sit there and you say, how do you resequence this stuff? How do you optimize? How do you figure out the workflow? You use workflow techniques, for example, like what Tax has in place, right? You put all that together. And after you do that, then you try to do everything real time, as opposed to dealing with a forecast. Within the tax department, though, we deal with forecasts all the time. So, we try as much as possible to pull information real time. It doesn't always work that way, but by using a pull approach, you're sort of helping to create that just-in-time mentality of you run the process, you get the information when you need it, as opposed to having to run it several times. And then last, we constantly focus on continuous improvement, and we call it pursuing excellence. That journey is an ongoing process of identification and eliminating waste and reducing process inefficiencies and variations. And so it's this constant sharpening the saw type of mentality where you produce a culture of employees that are constantly looking for ways to improve the process and qualify, better and better over time. That's what seems to work best in larger organizations. But again, every organization is different.
And do you have somebody dedicated in the team that is responsible for that process optimization and continuous improvement, or because it sounds fantastic, but it also sounds like, wow, I've never been at that level, I think, when I was in-house. So who is making sure that, first of all, it gets all blueprinted, secondly, also it gets operationalized and respected in a day-to-day fashion by all the stakeholders involved?
So I'll be very honest with you. At Mohawk, we've probably took lean to a new level. We pushed all of that down to the actual team, to the lowest common denominator. So it's a teaming approach. Yes, there are directors that are responsible for driving the process improvements over time, but it's a bottom up and a top down. And so now the businesses, because I'm in a tax department, the businesses do have dedicated professionals. Within my department and actually within finance, it's sort of incumbent upon the team. So that's just how we do it here. We try to empower people to constantly improve, rather than bring in a professional and go through the process that way. But again, everybody's different. My business does have process improvement leaders, and they're constantly focused on this stuff. We just do it, in the ordinary course, and that seems to work for us. We're not a very large shop, and that probably does also play into it. If we were a bigger tax department, 100, 200 people, then perhaps we would have a dedicated professional helping us. But for us, we do it ourselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. And can you maybe take us through one given example of how you came from a blueprinted process and then rolled it out? And then, as I said, because that is what I see as one of the bigger challenges or bottlenecks, how do you ensure that your local finance people or your local people are respecting the process that you have blueprinted? And what if they don't? How do you notice that they don't, that they are maybe cutting corners or doing completely in a different way? And secondly, then what is the implication of that? How do you then bring them back on track?
Wow, that is a very, very impactful question. And it's going to require me to unpack our process for you. So I think I will focus on a ready-made example because it's something that we're dealing with right now. And that is, as a multinational company, we have to address what's commonly referred to as global minimum tax or Pillar 2 requirements. And we are also a very decentralized company. We're not very centralized in anything we do. And so we had to sort of create from whole cloth a new process to bring information together inside what we adopted was a data lake. But the process to do that was very fresh for this company. We wound up, if I go through the steps here, we sat down and we said, in today's environment, how would we do this? And it was a cast of thousands. There were 80 plus people involved. It was going to take a large number of outside consultants to help us. And we made a decision we didn't want to do that. So the value was getting the compliance done on our timeline under a budget, that made sense for this company. So we defined the value as being able to do everything ourselves for this project. That was our value. Then we said, well, what are all the steps? Well, that included going back to the business. We had to work back with all the different business segments, everybody from, we have operations in Russia, we have operations in Australia, Brazil, Europe, Mexico, North America, right? We had to put business roundtables together, figure out what their processes were, and then how do we fit within those processes to bring the information forward in a unified manner that met all the requirements of the legislation. That took a lot of time and effort, right? That's part of what people need to remember. Process improvements and trying to create things out of whole cloth are time intensive. This stuff is hard, and you need to be dedicated and motivated to get it done. We also then, once we knew we mapped everything, then we said, okay, how do we put a new process together? And we mapped all of that, and we shared it back out with the businesses, and we asked them to validate for us, could they do this? Could they do it in the timeline we had, et cetera, et cetera. And then we set up that pool of information. So the nice thing about a data lake for this exercise is we could pull information one time and use it for multiple purposes. That created all kinds of efficiencies. So we tried to eliminate waste. We tried to eliminate manual effort. We tried to automate. We had to automate. We have operations in 170 countries. We have manufacturing in 20 countries. To do all of that on a manual basis to meet these regulations is just not humanly possible. We were not going to hire an army of people, and we were not going to go external with Big Four help to get it done. And so, we needed to do something like this in order to make the compliance happen. And now, we've gone live, and so now we're into that iteration, right? We're constantly trying to figure out how we make things better now that we have a working solution. And so we've got 6 months to do that, right? I mean, these rules don't, the first compliance starts in 2025. And so we've got 6 to 9 months to make that happen. And we'll be constantly, again, going back to the business units for that continuous improvement cycle. This is what we thought, the rules changed, this is how it impacts us, this is what we need from you. Constant improvement, and it's iterative. It worked out really well for us, but it also enabled something that we really were not expecting, and that was better harmonization and communication amongst all the people within finance, because they had to come together to operate for the value of Mohawk and not for the individual business segments.
Wow, that's also a very valuable answer that you're giving there. And I also need to unpack that a bit on my end. The thing which caught my attention was you said at a certain moment in time, like, it takes a lot of time that you need to invest in blueprinting the process and then continuously improving it, time that you then not can spend on other stuff, other tax activities. What are the expected outcomes, the expected benefits that you hope to get with having solid processes in place? Or are there any specific KPIs that are directly impacted by having the good processes in place? This to inform the audience of, it's not just maybe having the process and to what you said, like reducing manual work or going for efficiencies, but it can maybe also be directly linked to other KPIs, unexpected KPIs. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things that I'm evaluated on is on maintaining talent, keeping people employed within my department. And so if you think about it, the new workforce, the kids coming out of school, I say kids, it shows you that I'm old, but the kids coming out of school, they want to be focused on value added activities. They don't want to do manual stuff. And as a company, we don't want them focused on manual stuff. We want them focused on the value added stuff that the businesses value, that the company values. And so by having a solid process, you free people up to really focus on what matters. And so, KPIs just come and go. The process and the people that run the process is really what matters at the end of the day, because it's that process that helps you accomplish everything you need to do within the tax department. It helps you get the compliance done on time, on budget. It helps you get the calculations done so they can be reviewed on time, so that you can make sure that the planning gets into the compliance, gets on the tax return, and have sufficient time to review that stuff so you're not waiting to the 11th hour so that you don't, inadvertently make mistakes. Impacts your KPI. It also means that, the kids coming into the program see future success. So they can see that the company is making an investment not only in them, because you're upskilling them and keeping their skills fresh from a technology perspective, but you're also having to educate them about how the rules apply constantly in this new environment. So that creates a nice challenge for them to learn it, and for the company to keep them. And ultimately, it's about keeping people engaged and keeping them focused on the right activities from a long-term perspective that builds that increasing value within the tax department. So yeah, KPIs are important, but the rest of this stuff is also important. And it all feeds into whatever those KPIs are in terms of how you meet them at the end of the day.
Oh, wow. That's really, I think, a very proactive way of thinking, because I would never have linked it to retaining talent. And that's exactly what you are saying. I think that by having those processes in place, you want to make it as pleasant and as productive and efficient as possible for your team to do the tax work, right?
Oh, absolutely. There is nothing more that drives me nuts than somebody having to work an exorbitant amount of time. We pride ourselves in not creating a sweatshop mentality at Mohawk. And one of the ways we do that is by ensuring that we have a good process in place so that everybody knows their role, everybody knows what they have to do, the timelines, etc. That's not to say that, we have ebbs and flows, but by and large, we want people working a reasonable amount of time, 50, 60 hours a week, probably maximum at the end of the day. And if we can do it for less, we're going to do it for less.
I like that. So it's directly linked even to well-being. So that's indeed very interesting. When I think about processes, process excellence, process improvements, it's mostly in my head linked to tax compliance. And tax compliance, I mean, we can spin it as we want it, but in most of the times it's seen as a necessary evil, like something which we need to do, something which tends to be tedious and boring, and definitely in the absence of good processes can involve a lot of chasing of stakeholders and then maybe manual review and reconciliations and whatnot. I'm always hopeful that tax compliance can also be a very value-adding activity. And I'm curious here to hear from you, how are you looking at tax compliance in general across the different tax domains, and how to derive value from it more than just filing all your stuff on time and paying all your stuff on time, but how can you derive real value from this activity? Any thoughts on that?
So you really have to turn compliance on its head. Compliance, as you said, is a necessary evil unless you look at it as your ticket to do business. If you don't get your compliance right, you go out of business. So if it's your minimum level of requirement, you have to get it done, right? Do you need a gold star to do it? No, but you need to get it done. The other thing, though, is ultimately, you haven't done anything from a planning perspective unless you get the result you're looking for in the compliance. So it's a symbiotic relationship. It's not about just putting numbers on a piece of paper. It's about making sure that you tell the story that you're looking to tell as a company. And so you do the planning, you get the planning reflected in the numbers, you get everything else done, right? Because you got to stay in business. That's the only way you can sell product and, stay current and pay your people and help them and help yourself. And so it's a symbiotic relationship. And so that's ultimately how we look at it, is compliance is not a necessary evil. It's what happens because you're a well-run company, and it's what happens because you need to do planning, and you have to get that planning into the tax return, because without that, you haven't done anything. And then, of course, the last piece of this is if you do the compliance right, so if you have good planning and you get the planning into the compliance and you do that right, then the audit that happens, 3, 5, 6 years down the road, you have everything you need to defend what you did in that tax return. So it truly is a symbiotic relationship. If you fall down on any one of those 3 areas, then you really haven't done anything at the end of the day. So it's all vital.
I like how you represent it a bit as a kind of a life cycle, closed loop, where everything is indeed linked to each other. Do you think that in an average tax team, everybody needs to do every now and then compliance, or should that be an isolated team that is deeply specialized in it?
So I'm going to show my age. At the end of the day, Stevie, in order to be a good tax, I was about to say tax planner, but that's just my background. Just in order to be good at tax, you have to know how things hit the tax return. The only way you learn how things hit the tax return is to do the compliance. Full stop. Do you need to focus on it for your entire career? Some people do. If they love it that much, then yes, absolutely. Being in compliance is a great career. However, it's also a good starting point for branching off into other areas of tax, whether it's international, state and local, property tax, whatever the case may be. you still always have to bring it back to the tax return because it has to get into the tax return, and you have to understand how everything impacts the tax return. The only way you can do that is by starting with the return.
Yeah. And it seems that in your organization, you are, let's say, there is a deep, maybe verticalization, or you have a fairly deep level of control, I sense, over compliance, knowing that typically it's an interplay between, as I said before, like local finance people, maybe external advisors, your tax team. How do you make sure that the quality levels outside of the tax team, when it comes to compliance, are at the level you want them to be? Because it's one thing to have a very strong team that knows a thing or two about tax compliance, but what about the stakeholders we need to work with in any case, local finance in particular, and maybe the same for the advisors that you bring on board?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the question you're asking is about an operating model. Ultimately, how do you put all the pieces together? In an operating model, a good operating model is different again by company. Everybody's got a different view on this stuff. One of the eye-opening experiences I had when we put our data lake initiative together was I realized that so much of tax work at Mohawk gets done outside of the tax department. Remember, I said there were about 80 people that were providing information into the tax department. 80 people, non-tax people. They were all within finance. They were all within business finance. They were all, they were outside my department. And so I tell you that because that's just a microcosm of how other processes happen within this company. So the operating model that we have is call it a co-sourcing or a sharing approach, not only within the businesses, but also with external advisors. So, candidly, we don't have enough bodies to do all the work, nor expertise to do all the calculations. So we have to partner with people. We have to partner with Big Four accounting firms to help us with calculations. We have to partner with various areas of the business to get information on our timeline and in the way we need it. And so we focus here on technology and automation. We talked about that before. We want to leverage our technology and automate it. Why? Because we don't have a lot of people, right, to do the stuff manually. So that's step one for us. Step two is making sure that we invest in our people, that we get them up to speed with the technical side of it, as well as having a culture of continuous learning, because ultimately, if I need something from you, I have to educate you about what I need, why I need it, when I need it. These are all skills that basic tax professionals coming out of school, you develop those skills. You're not born with them. You have to learn to communicate. So we have to encourage our professionals to do that. So we try that as much as possible. We also then try to optimize our process. So these 80 people that I talked about, right, we brought them into our process for the Pillar 2 compliance, right? We brought them into our process for how we pull information across the globe. We then, we're trying hard to create consistency and also manage risk. That's another key item that a good tax department does within the operating model. They manage risk. We want consistency. We want to have robust management strategies in place so that we have a good handle on our risk. We want to know that we have good internal controls and that we have governance in place. Well, that requires people outside of the tax department. That requires education. That requires having a partnership with our business units. We spend an inordinate amount of time helping our business units understand more than just compliance that has to get done. We want to be viewed as a strategic partner with them so that when we go and ask for stuff, they are open and willing to provide it to us. Because again, I told you at the beginning of this call, this meeting, that we are a decentralized place. I don't have the ability to centrally locate and go pull something just wholesale. I have to sometimes ask people to give it to me. And that then says they have to understand why. And so, having that strategic partnership is key to obtaining the information that I need to actually do the job that is required. So again, for us, best in class looks like all that laundry list of things I just went through. Bringing everybody together under the same tent, focusing on technology and automation, making sure that we make an investment in those people and having the right skill set, helping to optimize a process, right? Because we want to do this one time. We also then want to have control over our risk so that we know what we're doing when we make those decisions. And then again, it's all about a strategic partnership with the business, because ultimately a tax department lives to serve a business. So that's really how we look at it here at Mohawk.
Sounds, very convincing. And again, like a token or a sign that you are well in control and have a good maturity of the in-house tax function in your organization. I think maybe if you look at selecting the right advisor for the right job, how do you deal with that? Because you are active in so many countries and you have so many legal entities, and then you have the different tax domains, the direct tax, indirect tax. You mentioned Pillar 2 already a couple of times, R&D credits, withholding tax. What is your recommendation?
We got all of that. We got R&D, we got withholding tax, we got all of that. So the approach that we've taken here, given our decentralized operating footprint, is to try and push those decisions down to the lowest common denominator within the different business units. I give direction, I give suggestions, but ultimately I trust that my local business partners are going to make good choices around the providers that they use. So we try hard not to dictate anything. We just want to make sure that people are making good economic decisions with the best available information. Ultimately, that's what we value as a company. And so I will tell you that we offend everybody. We use Deloitte, we use PwC, we use E&Y. But we are very selective about which company we use for different calculations based on our experience. So I have a good tax department in Belgium. They have, through trial and error and experience, chosen to use a Big Four for some of their transfer pricing. They've maintained that relationship for a very long time. It's a deep, trusted relationship. I trust them to make a good choice. Even if I choose to value here in the United States another Big Four accounting firm, they don't have to be the same. Right? Ultimately, we all have a common goal. We all want to get to the same answer. How I do it varies. There are many different paths to success, but I care about a few things that I make it very clear to people. Do we have the right documentation? Do we have audit-ready files? Can we defend the transactions? Can we, do we have everything buttoned up the way we need it so that we can defend in real time? Do we know what we're going to do for the audit, so on and so forth? And so we have good, trusted advisors that we rely on over and over again. And ultimately, I trust and rely on my local teams to work that process.
And is there, let's say, a misalignment between process excellence and having a very diversified advisor landscape?
There can be, yes. There can be. It's not a linear process for us. When I tell you that I rely on my local teams, I mean, sometimes they do things that, in hindsight, after you look at it, doesn't make any sense, and so you want to change it. And so we do that, but we do it because we've looked at it collectively and we've decided this doesn't make sense anymore for the broader organization. So we're no longer just thinking about a specific business unit, which perhaps was the mindset at the time that a decision was made. We're now saying, stepping back with hindsight, does this really make sense for the global envelope? Yes or no? If the answer is no, then we change it, which is a healthy organization. And ultimately, that's what we want. We want healthy organizations that collaborate across the business units. That's our goal here.
Yeah, I like that. And already a couple of times you dropped like you don't want to have your team work in a sweatshop environment. You want to empower people to give them the responsibilities and, for example, the possibilities to select the best advisor for the best or for every tax job. I hear a lot of very interesting elements, I think, around building and developing tax teams. A lot of best practices already between the lines. So let's focus a bit on that topic, because I have the impression that you have very strong opinion on
maybe.
If we start with like let's push retaining the team a bit to the end. Like, let's start with building the team. What are some of the challenges that you have experienced recently? I can think of like the war for talent. Everybody is facing the war for talent, and the same will probably be true for you. But other than that, what are some of the challenges that you face when you are building and continuously probably rebuilding your team, because people come and people go? Can you share a bit like with the audience?
I mean, look, the world that we live in is not getting any easier. It just isn't, right? The first thing that we're dealing with right now outside of talent is rapidly changing regulatory environment. Tax regulations are constantly changing, right? I had a call with somebody recently where they said, they quoted, there have been 3,000 legislative changes in the last 90 days. You can't keep up with that. As a tax department, I can't keep up with that. I don't care how large you are, it's impossible, right? You don't know how that's going to impact you, so you have to prepare for it. So anyway, the rise of globalization, the rise of digitalization, the fact that you now have AI involved with your audits. There are many taxing authorities around the globe that are now investigating the use of AI to analyze your tax return and send you an information document request totally automated. There's no human intervention. How do you deal with that? You got to think about that, right? You got to have arguments for what's good or bad about that. Data management, data technology integration. We struggle to manage as a department, typical tax departments struggle to manage vast amounts of information. We're no different. So going back to technology, it's important to integrate technology and to automate and to go through analytics and reporting as much as possible. Again, a key challenge for a good tax department. Risk management. Look, if we were super conservative, they wouldn't need a tax department. Having no risk or taking no risk is boring. So, but you need to find the right amount of risk for the organization where you work, and that's a broader conversation. But you still need to have it, right? You have to understand the capacity for risk within the organization, so that you know where to be on that continuum and that scale.
And sorry that I interrupt you, Don, but I wish that having the possibility to take no risk was an option, but it is just not an option, because we all know it's never binary, right? It's always gray. So having
that's right.
having a boring situation is very rare. I think it's always somehow exciting and challenging, because you need to take a position and you will most likely be challenged on the position.
Yeah, you just said something important. Challenge is also another word for conflict. When you deal with audits and you deal with your auditor as a publicly traded company, or the auditor from a tax authority perspective, that's ultimately conflict, and you need to prepare for that. I don't mean emotionally, right? But you need to have your thoughts organized in a way that you tell that good story behind why you did something, when you did it, and how it fits into the overall business and how it supports the business, right? All of that is called managing the process. But the other thing that I would tell you is in today's world, public relations is even more important than it has been historically, especially with public by public or public country by country reporting. That is a PR nightmare. Anybody that understands Google will be able to pull up everybody's financial statements and look at them. That is not necessarily the kind of group of people that is very astute at understanding how financial statements work, let alone taxes or ES&G or some of the other important concepts that run through companies today.
So, are there any specific things you do to attract tax talent to your company? Anything where you are different than others and which you want to share with the audience?
You know, we're very selective. I have to admit, we are very selective. Sometimes that means that it takes us a long time to find the right people, but we focus on we want hardworking individuals that have intellectual curiosity, that we want diverse talent, and we want collaborators. And sometimes you find them right off the bat, and sometimes you don't. And when I say diverse talent, I mean we try to find people that fill gaps within the organization, right? If I have a lot of data analysts, I don't need another data analyst. If I have international people, I don't need to hire another international person unless I've got a skill set gap that I need to fill, right? So we want people to collaborate with each other. We want diverse skill sets that complement each other. The tax departments are broad animals, and it's not the same animal. It's many different animals that sit in the zoo. And so we try to bring that diverse group of people together, but we do focus on those four things: diversity, collaboration, hardworking, and intellectual curiosity, which also means they have brain matter, they're smart, they figure things out. And the reason that's important is because not everybody has a long-term career in tax. If you're in tax, though, you see everything because all the transactions typically have a tax impact. But that also means that you understand accounting. It means that you understand process. It means that you think outside the box. These are all good skills that will lend themselves to other jobs outside of tax within the business. And so tax can be a nice pipeline for career planning as somebody comes into an organization and then looks to move within a company.
Don, I think you already shared a lot of value and good insights here, but what is your one piece of advice that you want everybody here to take home after listening to this podcast?
I would tell you that it's imperative as a young leader, actually any leader, it's imperative that you always promote your department. Spend whatever time is necessary to get your message out so that everybody views your tax department as a value creation center. I joke with my leadership that in the tax department, we do two things really well. We pay attention to detail and we sell a lot of product. In other words, we do compliance and we do planning and we defend the planning to produce the value that the company ultimately enjoys in their earnings per share.
I love that. And also that you are so candid about it, because indeed that's what we need to do. We need to promote the value of our tax function. One of the previous guests, by the way, said compliance is protecting the value, whereas the project and the structuring and the planning, that's creating the value.
That's another good way to think about it. I like that too.
All right. Anything else you want to share?
No, there's so much to talk about in tax. If you can't tell, I very much very passionate about the world of tax. I enjoy it, and as a result, I could talk about this stuff all day. And I hope that one day you'll invite me back.
I'm definitely going to remember that. And you give a pre-warning in the beginning of the episode that it would be epic. I cannot agree more. It was really epic. I really enjoyed it, Don. So thanks a lot for sharing all these valuable insights, your experiences, and to the audience, thanks for listening in.